Hello and welcome to the Michael Mama Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Today, I'd like to revisit the Brahma Sutras, and also I'd like to talk a little bit about the Upanishads. The Brahma Sutras are part of Vedanta. Now, Vedanta is part of the Upangas. Two major bodies, you could say, I guess, of Vedic literature are the Upangas and the Vedangas. The Vedangas generally are viewed as, grammar and the progression of grammar from single syllables to whole sentences to, more effective paragraphs and ultimately full expression, you could say. But the point is that it's in a larger sense, it's from the viewpoint of the experiencer as they evolve to the point where they fully see the light, Jyotish, in the highest sense of that word. Whereas the Upangas, sometimes they're even considered secondary, you could say, to the Vedangas. The Upangas, interestingly enough, though, could sort of be viewed as if the Absolute or God was observing the process of the evolution and everything is evolving, everything is gravitating back to oneness. And it's kind of like instructions in a way, or the Shastras are part of the Upangas, and they give directions how to proceed with it. Now, the interesting thing is that the Vedangas culminate in Jyotish, full enlightenment, fully seeing the light, if you will. And Jyotish means light. And the Upangas culminate in Vedanta. And the Brahma Sutras are part of Vedanta. Now, then what the Brahma Sutras are, they're like speaking, if you will, to an individual who just entered Brahman consciousness and kind of clarifying the experience. Because like we said in previous podcasts, when somebody first enters Brahman consciousness, it's overwhelming. It's kind of like, what happened to me? Or just almost unbearable. And so what the Brahma Sutras are then are a articulation, if you will, an explanation, a description of, and a clarification of, okay, this is what happened to you. Here's your experience. Now, the other thing that I'd like to mention a little bit, and we might get into them more in future podcasts, are the Upanishads. The Upanishads are different. The Upanishads are, actually within Apurusheya, in other words, within the Absolute, whereas the Upangas and Vedangas are Purusheya, they call that man-made, really, I think better to say of the relative. But at any rate, the Upanishads are sort of like, how would we say it? An invitation or a greeting or a speaking of from the Absolute to the relative in a manner that would help an individual put the pieces of life together. So the if we can speak in these terms, see, really all these things are cognized in their particularly they're structured within the Absolute themselves, and so that's the foundation. They're eternal like that, but nevertheless, based on what they are, because the whole thing's done with mirrors. It's all viewing everything from the same one thing from different angles. You see. So if you wanted,
Michael, if you're taking somebody to Brahman consciousness, because the idea is that, obviously, what's what we're trying to do is get on that, get to there. is there an order that is recommended, or is it different for everyone? Or
Well, that's an interesting thing because it's conceivable. Well, boy, that's a big question. Let's say essentially the Upanishads are things that take all the different fragments of relative life, because that's what relative means, pieces, and brings all the pieces together into a wholeness. And so that would kind of be the guide to bringing a person into the absolute. And then once they're awakened to that value, awakened to the absolute, that's Brahman consciousness, when they're fully awake to it in all its glory. But you see, Brahman includes the totality of the absolute, of the relative, and also the absolute, all taken together as a unified wholeness. So probably sequentially, to answer your question, it would be, first the Upanishads, and then they lead into the Brahma Sutras. In fact, a lot of people say, and I don't agree with this, but a lot of people say that it's not even worth reading the Brahma Sutras because you won't understand them until you're actually in that early stage of unity consciousness, Brahman consciousness, and then they're there to clarify your experience. Because, see, the idea is that there are two facets, two aspects to knowledge, to enlightenment, we could say. One is knowledge, and knowledge is on different levels. Knowledge is, on a most superficial level, it's just intellectual understanding. But on a more fundamental level, it's like knowledge that comes from deep within your being. And that other side of the coin is experience. And so when your experiences through meditation and your knowledge then both become deeper and deeper and deeper and more subtle, they ultimately converge into oneness in the depths of the absolute, the depth of Kaivalya, Pranam. So at any rate, the Upanishads then are something that can be read, and they're like over 100 Upanishads, and they're just a handful that are considered the major Upanishads. The reason they call them the major Upanishads is because they're the ones that Adi Shankara did his commentaries on. But even more than that, you see, it's the analogy they use is like if you have a table, you can grab one leg of the table. You don't need to grab all four legs. You grab one leg of the table and you can drag the table across the room. Like that, by studying the major Upanishads, that can help you move the whole table. In other words, put all the pieces together. That's why it's said that before you get enlightened, you have to have experienced everything. And what does that mean? Experience everything? Well, that means experience enough of all the different pieces of the puzzle so that all the pieces, every piece of the puzzle, it all comes together into a unified whole. And that's the wholeness of relativity. And then there's also the wholeness of the absolute. And then those two come together to create a bigger wholeness, and that's called Brahman. Okay? So let's just take a look at the first handful of Brahma Sutras again, just sort of from this perspective. So you got this guy or gal or whatever, this person, and they just entered Brahman consciousness. And it's staggering. It's mind-blowing. It brings them to their knees. They have no idea what happened. It's just like, no matter how many books you've read about it, once you enter it, it's a completely different experience, okay? That's like the taste of a strawberry analogy. If you study a strawberry, study what it tastes like, get a PhD in it. Somebody finally hands you a strawberry, you bite into it. You say, I'm an expert in strawberries, and I can assure you one thing, this is not a strawberry. It's like that, So the first Brahma Sutra addresses the desire to know Brahman. And in a more universal sense, and why I think the Brahma Sutras can be read by anyone at any level, there's a natural tendency, like Scotty, you just alluded to, that takes separation back to oneness. Everything's gravitating back to oneness. Everything in the universe is evolving, moving in that direction. And so in that sense, yeah, the desire to know Brahman, the desire to come to wholeness, the desire to become one with everything. But then now let's look at Brahma, the Brahmas, that first sutra, as addressing that individual who just entered Brahman consciousness and is kind of blown away. Now, the desire to know here and now, the desire to know Brahman. In other words, here and now, the desire to know what in the world just happened to me. That longing is for everything, all the pieces of the puzzle to come together, the absolute, the relative, everything. There's a desire now to know it, to understand it. So you see, we have knowledge and we have experience. And now you have this experience, and that finest level of knowledge has to come in there so that the two unify into a wholeness. Is that clear, Scotty? That makes sense?
Is there always that awkwardness, or does it kind of just, some people will have just like completely be blown away and some people will be okay, I mean, or is it? Yeah.
It is possible. I don't know about in this Kali Yuga, it is possible to come in so gradually that could almost go unnoticed, but really, I can't comprehend that really. I mean, that's a theoretical possibility. It's theoretically possible. It says in the Yoga Vashishta for a mosquito to be enlightened, but tough to grasp,
Yeah.
So generally speaking, it's a mind blower, it's, and some people, when they enter it, they become, really in bad shape. Who was it? Ramana Maharshi, I think. Was it Ramana Maharshi? It took him a couple of years to get it together,
Right.
after he had the experience.
Well, are there signs that it's happening to you?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, you see that there's signs along the way. And they talk about the witness value, where the absolute becomes lively enough in your awareness as it does in meditation. In fact, for everybody, brief moments here and there, but there can be moments where it's lively in your awareness, and that's where this idea of the witness comes about, because you're in the relative, you're functioning in the relative, but it's like you're just watching what's happening. You're just kind of witnessing the whole thing. When that state becomes permanent, they call it cosmic consciousness. And so that would be a signpost along the way. Another signpost along the way is it's possible that I remember when I was a kid on the golf course. I'm a terrible golfer, but I remember I was a kid on the golf course, and we were at a par 5, and I got up to the tee and I looked, and there was a lone tree in the distance, halfway down the par 5 fairway. And all of a sudden it was, I am that tree. Now we can make a mood of that and say, oh, wow, cool. I am that tree, but we're talking about an experience here that's more profound than that, because I am that tree. And we can go into that more in these future sutras today. But that can be a signpost that, okay, boy, you get a glimpse of that and then it goes away, So, Scotty, I think then we'll go to the next sutra. Okay.
Sure.
Now this is an interesting one, because they're all so interesting. This one talks about the birth of the world and how Brahman is the source that births the whole universe. And, you can read that at any level of consciousness, really, okay, I get it. There's this absolute value and it births everything. But now let's talk about the actual experience of a person when they just went into Brahman consciousness. And what does that mean then? It means something very different, really, because in Brahman consciousness, the world is, we could say it's where you put your attention. You can put your attention on the earth and you run with the earth. You can put your attention on, like I said in the previous podcast, the pillow right in front of you, and you are that pillow. You can put your attention on the whole universe. You are the Hiranyagarbha, you know. But the point is then that whatever world your attention is on, it comes from Brahman. It is Brahman. But right now in this room, it's like everything in this room is just lightly etched. It's a Maya. It's an illusion, you know. It's lightly etched on the face of Brahman. And so Brahman is what births it. It's not the physical world that becomes the reality. It's Brahman that becomes the reality. And all of this, wherever you put your attention, be it a pillow that's lightly etched on the face of Brahman, anything, this room, lightly etched on the face of Brahman, your neighborhood where you're living, lightly etched on the face of Brahman. And so that's a very, really different meaning and that's now we're talking about the experiencer of a person. You know, what the heck happened to me? Okay, this is what's going on. Brahman birthed everything. Brahman birthed your world, whatever your world is in the moment. Is that clear? Does that make sense, Scotty?
Right. Now,
Okay.
when they're talking about, multi universes and things, is there more Brahmins that are putting their attention on
It's a
that?
great
And yeah.
It's a great question, Scotty. Really great question. There's one universe, and there are an infinite number of different prapancham. Prapancham is what we think of a universe, and like even in physics, they talk about parallel universes. Really, they're different prapancham, and prapancham is like perspective. You have your world, Scotty. I have my world. Everybody listening has their own world, and that world creates a universe, if you will, of our own. And in the case of us interacting right now, our universes are very, very parallel. They're not 100% identical, but they're very parallel. See, we each have our own individuality that creates our own perspective, and those are the different prapancham. But all the different prapancham then are subsets of the one Maha Prapancham, you know, the universe. And there's only one universe. Make sense?
Yeah. So that universe sets the parameters that you're able to perceive.
Well, yeah, but it's a big universe,
Right?
you know, and it's not, and it becomes like a field of all possibilities, even. You know, I was just addressing parallel universes. Yeah. When we talk about them being so similar, you know.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Next sutra. These are all. I love them all. You know. The next one talks about the birth of scripture. Now, scripture, and it comes from Brahman. You know. Now, scripture. Typically, we think of scripture as the Vedic cognitions, and you know, you can pull out a book, and it's kind of like a writing down, or go listen to the pundits chant in the temple, and you can hear them chant scripture, and that's all real. That's all very good, and for sure, Brahman is the source of that. Oneness births this. Within the absolute, it's just pure isness. It's like the core of Smriti, the source of everything, and it interacts with itself It's because it's consciousness, pure consciousness. Consciousness becomes aware of itself and interacts with itself. Consciousness becomes aware of those two things, three things that cascades out into infinity. So you have this underlying structure within the absolute itself. And that's, the swaras and then the prakritis and then, like that, power prakriti. But scripture now, though, let's go to the experience of a person that just entered Brahman consciousness. And now that, okay, let me get some clarification here. Because in that state, all of a sudden now, you are one with, what your object of perception. You're one with that pillow. And that pillow, it's your experience that that pillow is the source of all knowledge, is the source of the totality of all existence. And so that pillow covers the full range of unboundedness to point value, to thingness, okay? That, see, in the Rig Veda, the Vedic literature, it all starts with ah. Ah is unbounded, fully open throat. It all maps onto the structure of the vocal cords. And then it collapses down to a point value, a thingness value. And so, and then the first word from to ka, from unboundedness to point value is the first word of Rig Veda, Agni. And so that pillow, you see, then you experience in that, it's Agni. It's the full range of the totality of scripture, the totality of the Veda. And so when we say Brahma is the source of scripture, Anandamayi Ma said an interesting thing. At one point she said, I understand everything, she said. Another point she said, I'm just a small young child. You have to explain everything to me. I don't know anything. And so what was she saying there? Well, she knows the essence of existence and she sees it in all things. So all the knowledge of everything is contained in the pillow. It's contained in every object of perception. It's contained in everywhere. It's all scripture. So Brahman is a source of scripture, meaning Brahman is that pillow. Am I making sense there, Scotty?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very cool, isn't it? I mean, it's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Next Brahma Sutra. Oh, this is, again, these are also beautiful. It says here, it talks about how Brahman, so now we talked about how everything comes from Brahman. But in this one, it says Brahman comes from harmony. In other words, we're going the other direction. When all the pieces of the puzzle come together in a unified whole, that wholeness that it creates, that sense of wholeness it creates is Brahman. Brahman comes from harmony, but all the thingnesses that are harmonized together come from Brahman. It goes both ways. So an interesting thing too, though, to go back to the previous sutra for a second, there's this, you've heard Indra, right? King of the gods, Indra.
Yeah.
Indra, if we go back to the pillow, there's a wholeness value to that pillow. And that wholeness value is Indra. But then this room, there's a wholeness value to this room. And that wholeness value, that samhita value is Indra. And all the gods, because the transition from A to Ga, A to Ka contains all the gods. So in that sense, Indra then is king of the gods. Is that making sense, Scotty?
Right. A question I have though is,
Yeah.
sometimes you see different temples that are dedicated to different gods, or there's
Mm.
different, sects that, the Shiva people, or the, this, whatever, the Vishnu people, or is that what's keeping everything separate, or is it you're wanting to harmonize all of these things? You know what I mean? There's some people that are they just trying to get through that god or that temple or whatever? Is it possible to get to Brahman? I guess it
Oh,
is,
sure.
because it's everywhere, right? Or do you have to
Yeah.
harmonize everything?
It's like it's like if you can look at the in the kaleidoscope things, you can look at them in one way. You see it's everything dancing around five and five this, five branches, everything's coming off. But then you can also look at it like there are seven colors, and so it's all the dance of seven colors. Uh, uh, or you might look at it as the dance of the two, the lines and the spaces between them. And so, but every one accounts for the totality, and every one is just a different entryway into the totality. And a lot of that has to do with that the idea is Ishtatevata. Now, even that takes form in different levels. On one level, can become a cultural thing, a family thing. The family's devoted to a particular deva, but also it's in a deeper sense, like, even though oftentimes they come out to be the same thing, but in a deeper sense, it's the individual. And so that's why when you look at anything and you see it in Brahman consciousness, when you perceive it, you also see the value that is the Ishvat Devata. And so, in other words, like, you look at that pillow, and that pillow is the personified quality of Brahman, of the one thing that is the source of everything. And simultaneously with that, you can see it as all of this is just lightly etched on the face of pure isness, pure beingness, pure consciousness. And so what name would you give to that? I believe it's different for everybody, because what you're experiencing from the personified correlate is kind of like what you're saying, Scotty, the angle that you approach it from based on the uniqueness of your own physiology. To me, it's he who has no name, no opinion, no commentary, no bias, no viewpoint, no prejudice, just fully aware. I think, sort of tangentially, if that's one of the beautiful things, like the Shiva Linga at Sri Someshwara Temple right down the road here. Doesn't move, doesn't comment. You go through your life, and one day something's going on in your life, or one period of your life you're going through something. You go to the Shiva Linga, hasn't shifted a bit. Sometime later you go back, your life is in a very different situation. Shiva Linga hasn't shifted a bit. And so it becomes like it's a mapping, it becomes like an eternal touchstone that's just there. No opinion, no comment, just pure isness. Is that responsive, Scotty?
Sure. Well, I wanted to make sure that I kind of understood a couple things too, because like when you're talking about, like for some people, maybe they saw the sun and it was their road, or some people saw the pillow and that was their thing.
Mm.
The Ishta Devata aspect of it is like I've heard you talk about before. There's many roads to Rome. It's which road is best suited for you would be ideal, but obviously there's a lot of different roads that you can get there,
Yeah,
right?
sure. And at some point along the way, though, it becomes more a function of the uniqueness of your own subtle physiology. I'm not talking blood chemistries here. I'm talking deeper. But the physiology of your own consciousness. And that ultimately would dictate what they call it the Ishtadevata, it's
Right.
it's the uniqueness of your own being,
But some people, it just happens, right? Or it's not like you were studying the Upanishads and then you were studying Brahma Sutras and then you became enlightened, or right?
We're going to get to a sutra here that talks
Okay.
about the teachings,
Right.
the teacher, if you will. When we get there, be sure I address that, but I think we'll
Okay.
wait and do it here just in a few
Right.
minutes. Okay. So it's the harmony that in 114, it's the harmony that brings about Brahman, that births Brahman. And previous to that, Brahman birthed the existence of all relatives. So it goes both ways. Now, the next one, this is really cool too. Talks about cognition. And it says something to the effect that, because of cognition, it's not opposed to scripture. But let's talk about the experience. You look at that pillow. Oh, I keep saying pillow just because there's a pillow right across the room there. And that pillow, kind of like Ananda Ma said, I understand everything. That pillow understands everything. That pillow is the essence of everything. And when you've entered Brahman consciousness, you see that in the pillow. That pillow is the source of everything. So what have you just done? You've cognized that. You've recognized, in a sense, that pillow on the deepest value of what that pillow is. Typically, cognition is something that, the rishis did thousands of years ago, and a rishi closed his eyes and cognized a part of the Veda and chanted it out. And that's all for sure real. But now here we're talking about, again, with the Brahma Sutras, go back to what the experience of somebody is when they first entered Brahman, and they're saying, what happened to me? What's going on here? Am I going crazy? It's cognition. And I'm trying to stay in order with the sutras here. And so we'll go on to the next one here, which says that cognition is not secondary because of Atma. Beautiful, because you see what they're saying is the cognition, what you're cognizing there, it's not secondary to the totality. It is the totality. Why? Because of Atma. And what is Atma? Atma is, it's the seed essence of the individual. And it's almost like in Brahman consciousness, you realize that the whole universe, the whole world is revolving around you, around Atma. It's the Atma that brings together all the pieces of the puzzle into a unified whole. Cognition is not secondary because of Atma. Atma is kind of like the foundation point, right? If you will, at the junction between relative and absolute. And so, but from your experience, it's the source of all that. Now, how can that pillow be the source of everything, and somebody's Atma be the source of everything, and the cell phone be the source of everything? There's a principle in mathematics that helps illustrate that, I think, and that is if you have just a circle, like a hula hoop, there's nothing inside it, there's nothing outside of it, it's just the points on the circle. Where's the center of that circle? Can't be inside the hula hoop because in that universe it doesn't exist. Every point is equally the center. it's called a Riemann sphere, I think, for mathematics. But it's like that. It's not a contradiction. It's a structural reality. Okay. I hope, was that clear, Scotty? Was that okay?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Now here, the next one, 117. Liberation owing to the teaching. And here's where we get in that word teaching, Scotty. I wanted to save it for here. Because when a person enters Brahman consciousness, again, it's disconcerting, it's overwhelming, it's what happened to me. And so there's a process from going from it being just overwhelming and not really, understood what's going on. And so that's where the teaching comes in. And the teaching helps clarify things. And it's when the pieces, when the understanding, knowledge, but we're talking on a deeper level here. We're not talking about, 2 + 2 = 4, I have that knowledge. We're talking about an understanding of, oh my God, that's what that is. And yeah, that pillow is Brahman, and all this is Brahman, and the house is Brahman, and this room is Brahman, and okay, and so it starts to make sense, but sense in a deeper sense, and so the teachings help with that. But now the question becomes, Scotty, typically, and fine, correct, the teaching would be, okay, you got some spiritual master, you're reading the Upanishads or reading the Brahma Sutras, and it helps clarify it. And so when all the pieces come together, that's liberation. That's when the intellect and the experience come together into a unified whole deep within the silence of the absolute. And that's liberation. So liberation is kind of like a calming down or a settling down or a state of contentment with the experience. And so teaching in another sense can just be the result of the experience. You learn from experience. You try to figure it out, and ultimately the self is revealed to the self, by the self, and through the self.
But Michael, how much does having a teacher and having their influence on you help that process?
I think it's huge. And again, we get into a theoretical construct here, don't we? Sort of like the question you asked before, it's possible for there to be an enlightened mosquito. It's possible for somebody to enter Brahman consciousness without a teacher, because here's the thing too. First sutra, here and now, the desire to know Brahman, that desire is a pursuit. It instigates a pursuit. And that desire can be once it happened, but it can also be a person starts to long to understand God. It becomes a passion. And then what do they do when they go out and they search? And what do they search for? An understanding. And how they try to get that understanding from a teacher. There's a thing called the Mahavakya, great word, speech, vak. So the Mahavakya is actually, traditionally, it's a word. And there are a bunch of different Mahavakyas, and traditionally, it's like the guru at just the right time, when somebody just enters that state and they're just like dumbfounded, says the Mahavakya. It can be a short sentence or what have you. And that, boom, okay, it helps them crystallize their understanding of what's going on, you see. But it's also said that a Mahavakya can be given without even the spoken word. Or it could be all the previous understandings from the teacher or from life that all come together into a unified oneness, and it clicks. But let me hang on about saying it clicks. I don't know that it really clicks in that sense. It's a process. I mean, it's a process of becoming comfortable with and resting with. It's a state of contentment that comes. And I don't know, somehow contentment and clicks, those words don't seem to go together, do they? So I kind of don't like the word clicks, even though I just used it, you know. So then the next, which is kind of fun, you know, it's at 118. It talks about there's no separation in that state. There's no word. It says there's no word for separation. The funny thing about that is there's the word separation right there. And so this is no word separation. So what does that mean? That means on the deepest level of the experience, if you were to create a vocabulary, so to speak, for that level, you wouldn't have a word for separation because there's no such thing. Okay, Scotty? And then the next one, 119, talks about it's all about returning to the self. That takes us back to this idea of Atma, you know. It's all about the Atma and awakening to it, the depth of your being, that seed of your essence, and awakening to that. And then it's a matter of just getting more and more comfortable with that. There's a word, boy, what is that word? It's slipping my mind. Pantya, I can't think right now, but all it means is see. And it just is just see. Just see. I mean, just look at it and see what it is, you know?
Michael, ultimately, then it's up to us as the individuals to do this. It's not like the teacher can like tap us on the forehead or you know, just throw us into that consciousness. It's
they talk about Swami Muktananda and his master Nityananda.
Yeah.
Yeah, they talk about how Nityananda hit Muktananda on the head with his sandal, and then Muktananda just talking about unbearable, you know. I guess he went into a cabin, as I recall this story, and was really going through it for a time and came out enlightened. So, you know, I mean, the timing is right. It can be the exhaust from a truck. That can be the thing that taps you on the forehead, so to speak. Not very likely. We're talking about an enlightened mosquito again, maybe. But the point is that the physiology, the psychology, and I'm talking about greater physiology, greater psychology, all has to be right. And then who knows, anything could do it, you know. But generally speaking, it's a process of evolution that takes place over time. And generally speaking, you know, you got to have the guidance of because you see, here's the thing, astral echoes. I like to say echoes of truth perceived as truth hold truth at bay. And so you can cling to a notion of unity. And that can, and so, and it's just an echo of truth. You can read all the Vedic literature and, okay, I get it. And you cling to that level of understanding. But like they say, knowledge is a function of your level of consciousness. As your level of consciousness deepens, your knowledge changes. It goes deeper. And so it's a process that's highly based on the evolution of consciousness. As your consciousness goes deeper, your experience goes deeper. As your consciousness goes deeper, your knowledge goes deeper. And when the very source of existence, deep within the absolute, when everything comes together there within your own awareness, that's it. Okay. So it's all about returning to the self, 119. Okay, next one. Oh, this is a cool one. 1110. It talks about, so is it the self that overtakes the world, or is it the world that overtakes the self? So now let's go back to what's the experience of a person that just entered Brahman consciousness? Did the self overtake them, or did did their individuality overtake the world? Well, there's the principle here of motion, because you see, in that state, you can go either way. You can say, okay, that pillow birthed the universe, or you can look at it like the universe birthed that pillow. I am the totality. I am Brahman. But then Brahman is me. Which direction does it go? And it's by virtue of motion. And see, that's the thing. In that state, you can just, by your attention, you take your attention from the pillow to the room. There's a motion there. Okay, the room is Brahman. Okay, the pillow is Brahman. Okay, the universe is Brahman. Okay, there's the Hiranyagarbha, it's Brahman. And so there's motion. Make sense, Scotty?
Yeah. Isn't it always there though? And it's just the person not being aware of it, you know? I mean,
Sure. Yeah, and it's also where even a person in Brahman consciousness puts their attention.
right.
You know, it said that, even a person in Brahman consciousness still has a human physiology to their awareness. And so they can know any one thing, but they can't know multiple things. Whereas omniscience, God has a different, if you will, physiology to their awareness. So God is omniscient, all-knowing, all things, all the time, simultaneously.
Well, is it because isn't it kind of like you always see that your eyes and your brain and everything just it can perceive so much more, but your brain has to filter out all of these things so you can function. So is that part of the awkwardness? Is that now there's this portal that you're one with everything, but now you've got to now I've got to so that I can deal with things in this reality. I've got to like focus this down to where I can interact with something,
Yeah, you could say that.
saying it right, or
you could say that.
Yeah.
1111 just says everything comes from the core of Shruti, knowledge and experience. We really already kind of talked about that, didn't we? This is a nice one too. 1112 talks about bliss, and bliss comes through practice. See, now practice is another word. Practice, the teachings, experience. So you could say through the practice, just living in that state for a while, kind of puts the pieces together for you. And that works in conjunction with the teaching. And the teaching, certainly the least awkward way for that teaching to come about is by reading the Brahma Sutras or having a teacher that is knowledgeable. But of course, based on the level of consciousness of the teacher can be perpetuating an echo of truth. And there's tons of that in the world today. And what there's a Chinese proverb: better to spend a long time looking for the right teacher than any time at all with the wrong one. anyway, practice, just through practice, through experience, comes bliss. Now, what is bliss? Bliss is the unification of knowledge and experience when they become one. And that's a physiological thing. It's rooted in the depth of the absolute. Okay. And I think, I don't know, I think that's enough for today, huh, Scotty?
Sure.
But it's beautiful stuff, you know. It really is just exquisite, and it's a path. And the main key is meditation, proper meditation. What I mean by proper, it's not that the others are improper, but their meditations is still the mind. Their meditations of focus. Their, you name it. There's a meditation technique you could do for it, I guess. But by proper meditation, I mean a meditation that allows, doesn't try to force, because it's like trying to force the mind to transcend. It's like trying to take a beach ball and push it to the bottom of a 12-foot deep swimming pool. It doesn't work. But if you just allow the awareness to rest into its own true nature, that's proper meditation. That's what we call proper meditation. It's called transcending. I think the best meditation out there for that would be, you could either do TM, transcendental meditation, or the actual technique has been around for thousands of years. And there have been different teachers that have come to visit Mount Soma, in fact, that teach the same technique, different mantra, but same technique. I assume it's different mantra. And at any rate, you can learn that technique for free. If you go to Michael Mammas's, just type in Michael Mammas on YouTube, go to my YouTube channel, and the first two things that come up, how to meditate. I would really encourage, if you're not doing TM and you're not already doing that meditation, start. Okay. Anything else, Scotty?
If we were to take like a group of people and like you said, finding a teacher is super helpful. Is it something that you could do like in this format, or is it better if you have them in person?
It's very, very interesting that you asked that question. I'm thinking about doing lecture tours again. I stopped with the COVID virus and all that, because there's a lot that we could do, but not in this format. So I'm thinking about doing it. It would cover Brahma Sutras and Upanishads. We'll see what we do. We'll see. Okay, I guess that's it for now, Scotty. Anything else?
No.
Okay, everybody, thanks for listening, and we will talk with you again.